Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. We continue the discussion of the King James Bible. In our last episode, we looked at the printing of the King James Bible, its various editions, some of the unfortunate translation and misprints that occurred throughout its early history. Today, we want to discuss how was the King James Bible received when it was first printed? How long did it take to achieve substantial success, we might say, among the common people? We want to look at some of the positive features of the translation, look at its language, memorable verses, some verses not so memorable, language changes that have occurred over the last 400 years that perhaps would cause some to pause at reading it on an everyday basis. So, with that said, let's go. Now, contrary to what you might expect, the King James Bible was not a runaway bestseller. It actually took several decades for its popularity to surpass the Bishop's Bible and, of course, the very popular Geneva Bible among the Protestants and the Puritans. There was one scholar in particular who criticized it quite harshly, and that would be Hugh Broughton. And he said this: "Tell His Majesty, King James, that I had rather be rent in pieces with wild horses, that any such translation by my consent should be urged upon poor churches." And he also added, "The new edition crosseth me, I require it to be burnt." Perhaps there were some sour grapes on Broughton's part. He had been passed over when translators were chosen for the King James Bible. He was known for being cantankerous, disagreeable, and probably this was the reason that took him out of the running for being chosen on the working committees. Open-mindedness and seeing other points of view were needed, and this was not his strong point. His comment that the King James Bible should be burnt did not end with that translation. So a slight digression commends itself right here. Lest you think that the practice of burning the Bible is an old and forgotten practice, it has happened in modern times. Dr. Bruce Metzger, chairman of the Translation Committee for the Revised Standard Version, tells this story. He once escorted visitors to his library and showed them a metal box, and he opened it up. Before them was a pile of ashes, and he told this story. There was a fundamentalist Baptist preacher in North Carolina, my home state right now, who took issue with the Revised Standard Version, particularly with Isaiah 7:14, in which the familiar passage, "A virgin shall conceive," was translated in the Revised Standard Version to "a young woman shall conceive." And he got all huffy, and so did many fundamentalists of the time who thought that Bible translators were removing the virgin birth from the Bible. So, during one of his sermons, he took a blowtorch at his pulpit and burned it during the sermon, and then sent the charred remains to Dr. Metzger. Now, Dr. Metzger commented that, thank God they only burned the translation and not the translators nowadays. There was another incident wherein Luther Hux, a pastor in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, announced his intention to burn a copy of the Revised Standard Version during a sermon on November 30th, 1952. This was reported in the press and attracted shocked reactions, as well as a warning from the local fire chief. On the day in question, he delivered a 2-hour sermon entitled "The National Council Bible, the Master Stroke of Satan, One of the Devil's Greatest Hoaxes." And after ending the sermon, he led his congregation out of the church, gave each worshiper a small American flag, proceeded to set on fire to the pages containing Isaiah 7:14 that we've just referenced. Back to the early decades of the King James Bible. Within several decades of the King James Bible, it became more and more popular with the common people. It was printed regularly, frequently, in small folios so that the average person could carry with them a copy of the Bible. No longer was it only confined to church pulpits where you would have to visit the church in order to read it. By the end of the second decade of printing, it was established as the version used in many households. Another 10 years later, it displaced the Geneva Bible in popularity, and that was no small feat. 1634, it was officially recognized by the Church of Scotland. Between 1611 and 1640, 182 editions were printed, compared to only 15 new editions of the Geneva Bible. This is according to Sir Frederick Kenyon. Donald Brake, author of A Visual History of the King James Bible, suggests 3 reasons why it became so popular. Number 1, the scholars who translated it gave equal attention to both the literary as well as linguistic elements. Its simple style made it easy to read and quite memorable. I think many of you who have been brought up with the King James Version today can attest to that, as I myself, though I have not read from the King James Bible in decades, still can quote from memory certain verses without batting an eye. Secondly, why did it become so popular? Well, it was readily accepted among the clergy and the theologians. Its absence of biased marginal notes, such as were contained in the Geneva Bible, was acceptable to Puritans and Anglicans alike. And this was the goal that King James had hoped for in bringing these two groups together. Thirdly, it succeeded on sheer merit. Within several decades, it dominated the market and had no rivals for 270 years. Let's take a look at some of the memorable passages in the King James Bible. Now, note, if you want to skip ahead 3 or 4 minutes, go ahead and do that, because we're actually just going to open the King James Bible, read from it some passages word for word to get a sense of its purity, of its simplicity, and how it was so memorable that led to it becoming so popular. We'll start, frankly, with the very first book, the very first chapter, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Next, we read from Psalm chapter 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Next, let's read from what we call the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, and we'll read just a few verses. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now let's read from John chapter 1, the first few verses, the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Finally, we will look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and we will read it in its entirety to finish up looking at some of the famous passages in the King James Bible. 13 verses in chapter 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have no charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long, and it is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. It does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity. These three, but the greatest of these is charity. Now let's look at some of the memorable phrases from the King James Bible. And keep in mind, many of these memorable phrases were actually from an original form from William Tyndale in his translation. Am I my brother's keeper? Genesis 4. The salt of the earth, Matthew 5. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, Matthew 26. Eat, drink, and be merry, from Luke 12. The powers that be, Romans 13. The patience of Job, from James chapter 5, fell flat on his face, Numbers 22. A man after his own heart, 1 Samuel 13. Pride goes before a fall, Proverbs 16. Like a lamb to the slaughter, Isaiah 53. Sour grapes, Ezekiel 18. Thorn in the flesh, 2 Corinthians 12. So these are just a few. There are many, many other phrases which have ingrained themselves upon the English language and remain to this day, things that we call to mind. And you hear it yourself, you may say it yourself, but the fact that these things have lasted for over 400 years is a testament to the spirit, the beauty, the simplicity of the King James Bible. Now, there are some problems with the King James Bible, mainly due not only to certain issues of word usage, but changes in the language. Despite a minority who believe the King James Bible is the only acceptable translation, there are problems with it. Changes in the English language since 1611 make it incomprehensible for someone not acquainted with the Elizabethan English to understand it. Keep in mind that language is a living thing. Words come into existence. They are born. Other words die and no longer remain in our common usage. Words that we were familiar with one understanding change meaning. Even in our own lifetime, we are acquainted with words that have changed their meaning. For example, there are words in the King James Bible we no longer use. Here's just a sample. Almug, algum, chasharim, chode, cracknels, gat, habergion, hosen, cab, ligure, nised, noosings, ouchid, ring straight, sycamine, tro, wimples. We also are acquainted with legendary animals found in the King James Bible. Deuteronomy 13 reveals to us there are unicorns. In Isaiah 13, we're introduced to the satyr. There's a dragon in Deuteronomy 32. There is a cockatrice, Isaiah 11. And an arrow snake, Genesis 49, verse 11, in the marginal notes. There are also phrases that make no sense, such as ouches of gold, Exodus 28, collops of fat, Job 15, naughty figs, Jeremiah 24:2, rentest thy face, Jeremiah 4, murrain of the cattle, Exodus 9. And then there are sentences that make no sense to us today. And Jacob sod pottage, Genesis 25. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, Exodus 19. Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing, Psalm 5. We do to you the wit of the grace of God, 2 Corinthians 8. You are not straitened in us, but ye are straitened in your own bowels, 2 Corinthians 6. And my famous, most incomprehensible verse is Amos chapter 4, verse 3. And ye shall go out at the breaches, every cow at that which is before her, and ye shall cast them into the palace. Figure that one out, and you win the prize. So I hope you can see that although there is beauty in the King James Bible, there is simplicity in the King James Bible. And there are reasons why it has remained a bestseller and a favorite for over 400 years. It is not a perfect translation. And much of that, as we have said, is due to the fact that language changes. And so we will leave it at that for this episode. And next episode, we will pick up with some further, more modern revisions and additions of the King James Bible, kind of bringing us up to date to our own time. If you have any questions or comments, please like, subscribe, share, do that thing. And I do appreciate you paying attention, listening. We will have further resources in the description of this episode so that you can follow up and chase down for further study. So much to learn, so much to know, so little time. But thank you for listening to the League of Biblical Enthusiasts, and we'll see you next time.